people forget just how efficient he was as a runner. We saw the rushing touchdowns last year in Pittsburgh. Those were up there in his starts, but he is third all time in rushing yards per game. And number 2 is Jaden Daniels. Number 1 is Lamar Jackson. Justin Fields averaged more rushing yards per game in his career in terms of his starts than Michael Vick, than Cam Newton. I mean, it's crazy how productive he was as a runner. You have to put Justin Fields in that mix as a player that could lead all quarterbacks in terms of rushing yards this year. If he hits 1,000 rushing yards, that's the quarterback you should have taken in drafts, no matter what anybody else does this season.
What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Is this the best second round of all time in fantasy football? And are second round draft picks more important than ever? Fantasy Football Daily with Theo Greminger on the Fantasy Points Podcast Network. Today I'm joined by my friend Faraz Siddiqui of Upper Hand Fantasy. We're going to unpack some of the best second round values and talk about some players that can turbocharge your builds in Fantasy Football 2025. Faraz, let's get it started. It feels like you've got to nail the second round more so than in other seasons. I tweeted this out yesterday, and of course you get like the people coming at you where it was like some guy was like, "Oh, you want me to make good early round picks?" What a tweet. That's a really strong take. But it's more so, I think there's a bunch of players that are going to have really, really strong seasons, and not missing out on those players and making like those difficult decisions. Like, we're going to unpack some of these, but drafts could come down to, did you make the correct decision between Devon Achane, Derrick Henry, and maybe a couple of those other second round backs? Did you make the correct decision between Drake London, Ladd McConkey, and A.J. Brown inside of round 2? I think drafts are really going to come down to those. So just your general vibes about the second round this year. Do you share my enthusiasm?
Yeah, it's funny because last year, you were able to grab guys like Jahmyr Gibbs, Puka, Derrick Henry was going in the second round. And you talk about decisions. Do you remember the decision that a lot of people had to make last year between Derrick Henry and Travis Etienne? That was a serious decision point. And I think that's what you're getting at here, right? You got to make the right decision, and you never know, right? Last year, you're able to grab those guys. Achane, Drake London was in the second round. Nico was like late second. Sometimes you can get him in the third in some redraft leagues. This year, it's almost impossible. Like, it's insane. Like, for me, like, I don't even want to make a decision. Like, I want auto draft to make a decision for me because it's impossible, right? Like, you got Devon Achane in the second round. He should be a first round pick. McCaffrey is there as well. Drake London, Bucky Irving, and AJ Brown too. Like, he's due for a bit of a regression as well, I think. So, I'm going to find a way to mess up in these drafts. Like, I just know it. Like, before the season, you kind of have an idea and you have these takes of, who's going to be the guy, who's going to be your favorite second round pick. But I'm going to find a way to mess this up, Theo. I'm telling you right now.
Yeah, and I think you sort of nailed it. And I don't even know if it's going to be as much of a avoiding a landmine like Travis Etienne was last year and finding that sort of incredible upside in a Derrick Henry. But I think a lot of times you walk away and you say, hey, my first round pick, I'm getting like 19, 20 points per game out of this pick. It's going well for me. And I'm happy that my second rounder is averaging like 16 points per game. But there might be a player that's going within a pick or two in that second round that's averaging like 21. And you feel like you're at a huge disadvantage. And then you've got to hit on a lot of those later round picks. So I think for me, it's really interesting. And you sort of like, we both sort of like reference to Devon Achane. We're going to talk about him today. We're going to talk about Nico Collins. We're going to talk about some of these players who everything's setting up usage wise and everything's setting up in terms of just upside potential for a lot of these players on different offenses, where for us, it sort of feels like you're getting a first round pick inside of round 2. You reference where Devon Achane should be going. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But one thing I love talking to my guests about this time of year is a lot of times we spend our time really focusing in on the players. And I think that's the way we usually should be doing it. But if we could take a step back and take a bird's eye view and identify the mispriced offense, a lot of times if you can find that offense that we're not drafting correctly, it can lead to multiple ADP wins, and you can blindly take 3 or 4 guys off of that particular team, and they end up being good picks to make. We've seen this time and time again. Is there an offense or two that you think the fantasy community might be sleeping on a little bit?
Yeah, the first team that comes to mind is the Colts, right? You look at Anthony Richardson's shoulder injury, which is allowing Daniel Jones to take over, right? He's probably going to start week 1. There's a chance that, like, and remember what this coaching staff has been repeatedly saying over the course of the offseason, it's like consistency is kind of the main factor for them in this quarterback battle. And there's a chance because of the shoulder injury, we see Daniel Jones not only start this year, but then because of quote unquote consistency, he could start well into the season, right? You look at his catchable target rate last year, that was better than, average overall in those first 10 weeks where he was a starter. His top 3 wide receivers last year were all in the top 10 in terms of catchable target percentage among qualifying wide receivers. Anthony Richardson dead last in that category. But these Colts pass catchers, ADPs, like all of them, have not caught up at all, right? You have Josh Downs as a wide receiver 46, right? Despite averaging enough fantasy points to be a top 18 fantasy wide receiver last year when Anthony Richardson was not the starter, right? He was extremely efficient despite all the quarterback issues last year. I mean, look at these numbers, dude. 30% first read target share, right? And this is with competing with other guys. Now, you got to consider Michael Pittman, his back injury, and that sort of thing. Michael Pittman's down at wide receiver 50. He's already proven he can earn a high target share, so I'm taking shots on him as well. But, like, you look at what Josh Downs was able to do last year, man, like 2.28 yards per route run last year. That was right behind Malik Neighbors, right? Third in targets per route run. Top 15 in expected fantasy points, target share, first downs per route run. Like, the dude's a baller. So I really think that, he's somebody that I'm taking shots on in every draft. I'm going for. And Tyler Warren, like, who, he was my tight end one in this class. And, sure, you want to take shots on other guys like A.D. Mitchell and Alec Pierce and best ball late, but I think this passing offense will be a lot more fantasy relevant than they're being credited for right now. And dare I say it, man, Daniel Jones, right? Sneaky rushing ability, QB 29 off the board. I really don't hate that at all, especially in 2 quarterback super flex leagues.
Yeah, I like your take on Daniel Jones. He's been a target of mine on underdog drafts, and we forget about the rushing upside that Daniel Jones has. Like, obviously, we know if Anthony Richardson's the quarterback there, he's going to churn out rushing upside. And Jones definitely not as efficient a runner as Richardson by any means. But in his peak season in New York, Brian Dable's first year, he had north of 700 rushing yards. So Jones is not a zero. He's got a floor there. I think that the Josh Downs, like, I have a lot of smart people like yourself on these pods, and I think a number of us, Scott Barrett included, are all over Josh Downs. Ryan Heath, all over Josh Downs. I have my Josh Downs bags packed. Michael Pittman's an interesting one. I'm glad that you brought him up because he's one where I've tried to play a little bit of catch up because we just think about what he was and the amount of money that Indianapolis is paying him. He had pretty much the same contract as a guy like Nico Collins, a guy like Jalen Waddle, and he's sort of being left for dead right now. If the offense bounces back, I think Downs and Pittman could both deliver. But I love your Tyler Warren call because I think another thing that we get from a switch to Daniel Jones is a little bit less of a threat of the quarterback inside of like the 10-yard line and specifically around the goal line. There's a chance that we see Tyler Warren in like a prominent receiving role where he's like a 20% target share guy. But then we also see him get like 5 rushing touchdowns this year in like a Taysom Hill type role. And that sounds like hyperbolic, but Penn State had two running backs who I think are going to be highly drafted by dynasty managers next season, including Nick Singleton, who we would have been drafting inside of round 2, I think, for our dynasty rookie drafts, if not earlier this year. Both of those guys are back at Penn State this year, but both NFL running backs. And with 2 NFL running backs in the backfield, Penn State still managed to continually get Tyler Warren the ball as a runner. So I love your Tyler Warren call out. I liked Colston Loveland a little bit more as a prospect, but it was like splitting hairs. They're both really, really good. Warren is a really interesting one. I love the Colts call out. Faraz, we talked about upper hand fantasy, and you guys are absolutely crushing it on Instagram. I think that this is like most of my guests, might have a strong YouTube presence or a really strong podcast following. You guys have this massive, massive base you've built up. To your credit, every single time I check in on you guys, your follower count just goes up and up and up. See you guys at places like the Senior Bowl. You're putting out outstanding video content. Let everybody know about what you have at Upper Hand Fantasy and why they should follow you.
Yeah, no, for sure. I appreciate that, Theo. We've been doing this for, 6 or 7 years now, just putting out content on Instagram. It was kind of one of those platforms where, it just came naturally to me opposed to X or YouTube. But then we've kind of evolved the content as we went. Like, when we first started, it was literally just me, putting up pictures with like paragraphs, as the caption, as the analysis, right? But we've built the team out, and now we have, I think the content's very unique, I think, in the space. And I do think there's a type of fantasy football player that likes to consume, content on Instagram. And you know what? The best thing about it is that, it really feels like a community on there with all the comments and, the interactions and the DMs, and all those private interactions that, one-on-one interactions that, we could have that we might not be able to have on other platforms. So, Upper Hand Fantasy on Instagram, that's really, the best place that, we have in terms of like where we put out content and also where we can interact with each other.
Yeah, and the Senior Bowl content, not to get back to it, was outstanding. And it was easy to find Faraz in Mobile because you had like a whole like crew there with like a real cameraman. So putting on like absolutely professional type production. Highly recommend you follow Upper Hand Fantasy on Instagram. And your takes are also really strong as well, Faraz. And let's start out. I love having guests on my show that agree with me on Devon Achane, player last year who led the NFL in receptions at the running back position. His rookie season was electric. The yards per carry one of the best we've ever seen in NFL history. Last year, in games where Tua Tagovailoa played, HM was giving you top 3 running back production. This year, Tua's healthy. We also lose Jonnu Smith, who was another threat on like those low ADOT looks where Tua Tagovailoa is quickly getting the ball out of his hands. Sort of your enthusiasm level for Devon Achane. I have a ton of Achane inside of round 2. Starting to see him creep up a little bit towards that 1-2 turn. Are you still comfortable taking him there?
Yeah, I mean he's a round 1 player. Like, and you mentioned, right? Like, you look at the games Tua was healthy for in PPR, he averaged more fantasy points than Saquon Barkley. So like, he could have been the overall RB1 in PPR leagues, man. Like, if Tua was healthy all year long, 6.6 targets a game. That was more than any other running back last year. And we know from Scott Barrett that a target is, about 2.5 times more valuable than carries in PPR leagues. 6.1 catches per game. That was more than any other running back last year. And like you said, Jonathan Smith is gone now. It's funny. Tua said it himself not too long ago, maybe a month ago or so, that, what do you like? They asked him, the reporters asked him, what are you working on this year, this offseason? What's more important to you than anything else? He goes, he's working on getting the ball out quicker. Like, what? You were already getting the ball out ridiculously quick. He was getting rid of the ball at an average of 2.21 seconds, which was second fastest in the NFL last year. 2.33 time to pressure. That was second in the NFL last year as well, according to FantasyPoints data, of course. So who is the beneficiary of that? Like, it's Achane, right? Like, it's all pointing in his direction. If the offensive line is going to continue to stink it up and he is focusing on throwing the ball short, like, it's going to be Achane. And as much as I would love a Tyreek Hill bounce back, which I think is possible, if the offensive line is going to continue to do what it is, because I don't think Mike McDaniel's coming into the season looking at, why did they just go ahead and just try to replace Jonnu so quickly with Darren Waller? And I think it's because they're trying to mimic what they had going towards the end of the year. I did not think that was going to be what they're trying to do. Like, when you have guys like Tyreek Hill and you have guys like Jalen Waddle, you want to get those guys involved, right? Not like around the line of scrimmage. You don't want to build your offense, within 5 to 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. Like, that's not a great proposition. Like, what they were doing when they brought in Tyreek Hill, that's what you want to do, the downfield action. But maybe it just speaks to the fact that they know that they're not going to be able to get a whole lot of production down there, and that's why they're building the way they are, which is kind of insane to me.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. I think that Achane, it's any way you want to like sort of beat up this offensive line. And on fantasy points, we had Scott DiBenedetto on School of Scott with me last week, our offensive lines guru, and he's like really bearish on this Miami O line. I think internally they're a little more optimistic than I think a lot of the fantasy community are. They drafted a lineman inside of round 2 and they signed Daniels as a free agent. So at least the guard situation is strong. The tackle situation could be a nightmare. Teron Armstead, of course, is gone. Patrick Paul taking over for him. So I think that like getting the ball out of Tua's hands and into Devon Achane's like very, very quickly on those low 8-out looks and some screen passes, that's going to be a huge part of the offense. But I do think there's an opportunity where Achane could also like really, really have his best season as a runner. He still is yet to give us 1,000 rushing yard season. He's talked about that as a huge goal of his. Wants to have 1,000 plus rushing yards, 500 plus receiving yards, and giving us that two-way ability in the second round. I also think we're getting a little bit of a discount where Miami 2 years ago was putting up insane numbers, top 5 scoring offense in the NFL. Now they're sort of back to the Waddle, Hill, Achane consolidated looks. So Achane's going to touch the ball over and over and over again. Jalen Wright's certainly not the threat that we would have had with like a Raheem Mostert, at least at this point in his career. So I'm completely with you. And it's funny to me, Faraz, how we're getting like so much Christian McCaffrey enthusiasm at 29 years old when we have this year 3 running back who's could potentially have 100 receptions this year.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we've seen an absolutely, multiple ridiculously years from Christian McCaffrey. He's supposedly healthy now. He's on a better offense, and we've kind of seen it happen. We've seen him win leagues for us. So I get it. And there's also like a big FOMO factor too, right? Like Christian McCaffrey every single year, there's a big FOMO factor. Like, oh my God, like what if I miss out? What if Christian McCaffrey was on the board and I miss out? Right? I think that's a big factor too. I don't see that as much with other drafters with Devon Achane. But at the end of the day, like for me, at this point, now that John, especially because John was out of town now, Devon Achane, man, like you said, like he could lead the league, in catches by like 2025 easily.
Yeah, he could be a 100 reception guy. So for me, I love taking that upside inside of round 2. And it's not a player that we've really had to, it's an underdog thing where you're seeing best ball drafters push him into round 1. Haven't really seen that in redraft. I had an
Yeah.
NFFC league where I got him at like 18 overall, 19 overall a few times. It feels like unbelievable value. One player who sometimes sneaks into the turn, but is often available in the early second round at the wide receiver position is Nico Collins. And I'm starting to see some collective enthusiasm for clicking the button on Collins in this range. His target competition right now are 2 rookies, ones we like in Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins, and then Christian Kirk, who Houston sent a 7th round pick for. Nico Collins has been consistently very good for the last 2 seasons, has been north of 17 points per game in PPR formats, but it feels like we haven't seen that huge peak outcome Nico Collins season. And you talked about Scott Barrett earlier. This is another player he really likes. He's compared Nico to a Julio Jones in terms of like what could be the ceiling type outcome for this sort of an alpha wide receiver. You're also all in on Nico this year for us.
100%. I mean, he is truly, truly elite. I mean, you'd be surprised where I have him ranked going into the season. Okay, like it's up there. Okay, like we're talking like top couple guys, and that's it. But he should be going higher than he's going now. And maybe because of the injuries, and he hasn't put it together for a whole season yet, right? And that's really what it is. But like, in my opinion, ahead of Amon Ra, ahead of Puka, ahead of Malik, maybe, but at least in that tier. And he's not going in that tier. He's going later than these guys, right? So, me personally, like I have him ranked above all the 3 of these guys. I think sometimes people, see a lot of these names, um, for Houston, and they make it seem like a competition, right? They see Christian Kirk and Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins, and they're counting 1, 2, 3. Oh my God, there's so much competition. They're all fine players, but Nico's an alpha wide receiver who will be deserving a 25 to 30% target share, right? You look at someone like CeeDee Lamb, who just got George Pickens. Right now, George Pickens in the past has demanded a 25% plus target share. Okay, great. So now when he comes in, I'm not saying that CeeDee Lamb is less or more of a player than Nico, but then you look at what George Pickens has done in the past, and you're like, okay, maybe CeeDee Lamb's target share goes down by a couple percentage points or something like that. But with Nico, you can't say that about any of these guys, right? None of these guys are going to, and you can't add up the target shares for these guys and say that you take it away from Nico. No, the alphas are going to eat first. And that's really what we've seen, right? You look at Amon-Ra in his rookie year. A couple of these guys were off the field. You're like, oh no, he only had that, deserved that, got that target share because these guys were off the field. No, that's not how it works. The way that it works is that no matter what, if anyone ends up getting a 25-30% target share, they are going to most likely maintain that, for their career, especially if they do it at an early age, or at least early in their career. So there's new McVay style offense coming in, that Nick Caley's bringing over. It's really interesting to me because the last 3 McVay coaches to leave and run another offense has prioritized their wide receiver one with the top 10 target share. Not only that, but these last 3 coaches, so we're talking Liam Cohen, Zach Robinson, and Kevin O'Connell, their wide receivers were set up to have their career years that first year away. Okay, so we saw with Justin Jefferson, we saw with Drake London, and then with Chris Godwin until he got hurt, right? So we're talking about a wide receiver, Nico, who's already elite, second and third among all wide receivers in yards per route run the last 2 seasons, second and 7th in fantasy points per route run, per fantasy points data, of course. And last year, he was on pace for more than 1,400 receiving yards if he never got hurt, which would have put him only behind Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson. So I'm with you, man. I think he's being slightly undervalued where he's going. And just like Achane, I think both of these guys, who you can get in the second round are absolutely steals and belong in the first.
Yeah, and Nico's also missed time in back-to-back seasons. It's just staying healthy, staying on the field. We could see that really big peak season for Nico. 15 touchdown catches in his last 27 games, and that was with an offense where Bobby Slowick, not to put a lot on Slowick because they obviously had some issues, but Slowick seemed like he was holding this offense back. I love the Nico enthusiasm. I had a discussion with Brett Whitefield this morning. Amon-Ra St. Brown or Nico Collins at the 1-2 turn. Nico just feels like much more of an edge pick. Are you also on Collins versus Amon-Ra?
I am. I have him ranked over him this year. I think, you look at also the, Ben Johnson leaving, it's like you have to kind of add some percentage points into the risk, for the Lions offense, right? Like, I'm not saying that, you got to be completely off of them because Ben Johnson's gone, but, also Amon-Ra, another couple risk percentage points is he just had knee surgery too, right? So like there's a couple of things there, right? But when you look at Nico, you're just like, okay, well, we know he has a quarterback. We know this offense could get way more interesting, just like we saw Atlanta's offense get way more interesting after Zach Robinson took over. So, same coaching tree. So yeah, no, I'm with you on that, man. I just think the upside is just a little bit greater when it comes to Nico with all those downfield targets and the fact that he's legitimately elite as a perimeter X receiver. Like I think most of the public in general, NFL fans in general, don't quite put him in that tier, but people like me, I do.
Yeah, and 26 years old for Nico, really in that sweet spot. The early, his breakout was a little bit later, so this could be really the peak season for him. So one that became really an interesting argument over on X a couple weeks ago was Drake London versus Lad McConkey. Both of these players are going right alongside of one another. Both of them are clear wide receiver ones. They're both younger. We could throw A.J. Brown into this discussion as well, but it really came down to London versus McConkey. Where are you at in this argument and your collective enthusiasm level for these younger wide receivers?
This is definitely one of the, so I can see why there's a huge argument over this because it's a very, very tough decision. I think one of the toughest decisions for me, but gun to my head, I'm going Drake London.
Me too.
I think both are clearly amazing players. I think Lad is still underrated by many. Like I think the second year wide receiver, is all about Malik, all about Brian Thomas Jr. But I think talent wise, I think Lad is like right there, to be honest with you. Now I think the the tiebreaker for me is kind of the offensive environment, right? I think LA now has two running backs and an offensive line who they can run the offense the way they want to run it, right? I think Harbaugh and Greg Roman want to do something with that, and I think they have the pieces to do that. And I think Ladd will remain like the pass funnel, for that passing offense for Justin Herbert. I don't think that's going to change. I think he's still worthy of a 27-28% target share. Will the overall pass volume go down a little bit? Maybe. That's still yet to be seen. I think he can still finish as a wide receiver one. But I think Drake London, like we just put out a post today on Instagram, who is our favorite dark horse to become the overall wide receiver one this year. And our pick was Drake London. No one averaged more fantasy points than Drake London the final 3 weeks of the season. With Michael Penix behind center, he was tied with two other wide receivers that for that 3 week span, 39% target share.
Yeah, it's ridiculous
over that span.
and
Absolutely insane.
the air yard share was like absurd as well.
Oh,
First read rates were through the roof. I mean, the sample size is small, but with Penix, we saw a little bit more of the hyper targeting the alpha. I'm completely with you. I had the exact same call. I had Dave Kluge on this show last week, and we did a predicting our wide receiver one, running back one, tight end one, etc. And then we gave a dark horse candidate. He's all over Achane, by the way, as well. We both were. So I
okay.
love having guests on that agree with me on Achane. It's like a no ball type question. But
Right.
Drake London, everything's sort of set up. And I think for me, that's really do I trust Harbaugh and Greg Roman to get Ladd McConkey there and really commit to we're going to hyper target this player? We're going to give him 170 targets this year. With Drake London, we already saw a top 6 wide receiver finish. I like Zach Robinson. I think he seems very sharp. I was very, very, very negative on him to start out last season. I think a lot of that was reflective over Kirk Cousins' struggles to sort of with the turnovers. Penix, I think, will be a little bit tighter with the football. And I think with Penix, he's sort of the forgotten man there. Not saying that Penix is somebody we want for our fantasy builds, but I think he's the sort of quarterback that can elevate his number one target over a longer course of the season. And for us, we've seen multiple Washington pass catchers, University of Washington pass catchers struggle in the NFL. Roman Dunze didn't get started last year. Jalen Polk could be cut this year. The only one that really was good was McMillan. And McMillan was sort of the third round pick. So the second round pick and the first round pick, those players, nobody was like Michael Penix is elevating these guys. If we look back in 5 years, we might say Penix got those guys huge draft picks and contracts. So I really like Penix there for London this year as well. Another wide receiver you're all in on, and this player you can get sometimes in the third round, but he's starting to creep into the back end of round 2, is Rashee Rice. Rice was really good last year, and it was a very small sample size. I think the market's coming to terms with what we saw in the first 3 games of last season. It was 4, but the first 3 healthy games for Rashee Rice before he was injured. We could see that for the entire season, where he's the focal point of the Kansas City offense, going to have that very high target share, a great slot rate, really the first down maker in the offense, a move from Travis Kelce to Rashee Rice. This feels like it could be a big season for Rice. We talked about Amon-Ra St. Brown. It feels like Amon-Ra a few years ago in terms of the profile and the usage with Rice this year.
Yeah, it does. And a lot of similarities, for the end of the rookie year stuff too, right? Like once he saw his route participation jump in week 12 of his rookie year, he finished the rest of the season as a wide receiver 7 in points per game, like very Amon-Ra-esque, right? So that is definitely, there's a parallel there. And then last year in those first 3 games, that translated again to the next year, 33% target share during those first 3 weeks. So like 33% target share from Mahomes,
absolutely crazy.
like it's a godsend. Yeah. It's a godsend. That's what you want, right? He led the NFL in receptions through those first 3 weeks as well. So this is like alpha wide receiver 1 stuff right here in the right offense, right? Would Rashee work in every offense? I was saying the same thing about Amon-Ra early on in his career. He's gotten a lot better over his first few seasons in the NFL. But it's really interesting how this is going to work. Now, he was the wide receiver 2, right, over the first 3 weeks of the season last year before getting hurt. And he had once he did end up getting that full-time role in his rookie year, he ended up doing his thing. And I think like he's being drafted as what, like low end wide receiver 1 right now in underdog and like other, best ball tournaments. But like in redraft, like he's going like third, fourth round, which is absolutely silly. Like I would not be able to stop drafting him there. I think he might be one of the best values on the board, period, in redraft. So it's just so silly that he's being taken that late. And the fact that it looks like to me and to like Drew Davenport, for example, who's been analyzing this case, on the law side of things, thinking that it doesn't seem like he's going to be getting a suspension this year. So because he's insulated from that potentially as well, and that suspension might be pushed to 2026, like I'm all in on Rashee.
I'll make a prediction, and this is not a legal take. This is a vibes take. He's never going to
Okay.
get suspended. Never. Rashee Rice, it's just going to be water under the bridge by that point, and people are going to be like,
Right,
what
right.
is even what was even the incident off field? So,
Theo, I want to tell you. Can I tell you a funny story real
oh
quick?
yeah,
So this was I was at like a family event, right? And this was when Rashee got arrested. Like the day he got arrested, and he had that whole incident, and it was a terrible incident. Now, luckily, like overall, like he was an idiot, right? There's no doubt about it. It was a dumb move, but I put out a post on Instagram and I was like really busy because I was at a family event, but I told my guys to like put up this post. It was just Rashee with the news, and then the caption was just "Go buy Rashee Rice in Dynasty." Right? People got so upset at me, like they were so mad. But listen, if you bought him that day, it would have worked out. People are like, "Should I buy him with a third round pick, with a rookie third?" I'm like,
dude.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
you know,
I made a few trades for Rashee Rice, and again, like people who get angry about this sort of a take, it's like go
right,
outside, nerd. Like it's like you have an opportunity to get 50 cents on the dollar for a player because of fear. If this was the stock
right,
market, they'd say you're
exactly,
really really smart, but because it's actual human beings, they'll
right,
try to lay off the upper hand fantasy. That was actually upper hand fantasy actually made you money that day. I had a
hundred
league like
percent.
that where I sent, I think it was a second and a third to get Rashee Rice in a single quarterback format, where this guy just throws it out there and he's like on the message boards, Rashee Rice, I'm looking for this and this. I paid him, and then like three other people send me messages saying I would have paid more, blah blah blah. So
Yeah,
yeah, like Rashee Rice, whenever there's fear in the market, usually it's an opportunity. We're not going to talk about him today, but I think you're seeing it with Jordan Addison, his ADP. People are basically treating it like Addison's going to get suspended. If he doesn't
right.
get suspended, then his ADP is going to correct. So take advantage of these opportunities when people try to get scared. And we don't know the legal system. When there's situations like Henry Ruggs, you know what's going to happen. But for
Right.
like the like speeding, even
Right. Exactly.
DUIs, domestic things, you have no idea what's going to happen. You don't know the legal, like the different jurisdictions, and for us to try to be lawyers instead of fantasy football
Exactly.
players is the wrong move. So let somebody else
Yeah.
in your league be worried. And if you get stuck holding the bag because you gave up a second round pick for a potential for a player that could be worth 2 firsts in a year, then you burned a second. It happens. Let's keep this going with our discussion, but let's pivot over to running back. Actually, I got one more wide receiver question. So we talked about some of these second round wide receivers. Let's talk about some of these third round wide receivers. When let's say Rashee Rice goes in round 2 and you're still trying to find wide receiver value, who's your favorite player between Garrett Wilson, Jackson Smith and Jigba, T. Higgins, and then let's throw the two older veterans, Devontae Adams and Tyreek Hill in the mix. And then just to make this more interesting, let's throw in Marvin Harrison Jr., who routinely goes at the 3-4 turn into this mix.
I find it really, really hard to pass up on Devonte Adams. I just think like with Sean McVay, with Matthew Stafford, I think Matthew Stafford is another dark horse to potentially throw for the most touchdowns this year too. Because you have him, you have Puka. They're just going to work off of each other. I think Devonta can have a monster year. You saw what he did last year. He came in and like took over, right? Like Garrett Wilson was kind of on his way to a great year, and he had a solid year. But Devontae Adams came in and, he kind of took over as somebody who you'd rather start than Garrett Wilson, right? And I think he's going to come in. I'm not saying he's going to do that with Puka, but he's going to make it a little bit of a dent. I think Puka is at a point where he's just going to produce no matter what. But Devonta Adams is somebody that I really want. And, it really comes down to quality of offense. Vegas really likes the Rams this year as well. I think they're going to score a lot of points. I think T. Higgins, I would love to grab him, but like I struggle. I think JSN's probably last on my list here, out of Garrett, JSN, T. Higgins, Devontae. But I think the thing with Garrett that is really intriguing for me is the fact that I think he can get like 160 targets this year. I think he can absolutely go insane and maybe lead all these guys in receptions, outside of Rashee Rice. So he has that going for him. But the Jets, they're not really you're not looking at a high scoring offense here, especially when you consider what Vegas is projecting for them. So I'm leaning, I basically gave an answer for every single person here. I basically gave a case for everybody, but I think Devontae is probably the guy here. The good thing is that, I can wait a little bit on Devontae, right? Like luckily he's going a little bit later than a couple of these guys. So I'm happy waiting, but I think Devontae's my answer.
Yeah, and I think my big takeaway is I'm more optimistic on JSN than you are, and a little bit more on T. Higgins. But I found that Devontae Adams at like that 3-4 turn area, when you get to like the 309, 310, and Devontae's on the board, it's just fantastic value. And we could see that Rams offense being just so consolidated between him and Puka Nacua. So I love the take on Devontae. I think really the big takeaway for me is the more I talk about the third round wide receiver values, it makes the third round into that's a round where I know I'm going to be able to find wide receiver value and I can adjust and I can find, sort of that first or second round running back. And I know I'm going to be able to recover with like a edge wide receiver 2 pick in round 7, no matter which way I start my draft. So round 3 is turning into a wide receiver round for me. Let's talk about Breece Hall, because you talked about Garrett Wilson and we talked about the consolidation of targets in the Rams offense. Breece Hall's been pushed down to round 4. You talk about last year for us. We talked about like ADP values last year, some of the guys who hit, some of the guys who missed. Breece Hall was a lock first round pick. Now you're drafting him in the traditional dead zone. There's a lot of smart people kind of coming out when we get to July saying, hold on, this is an overcorrection. We might have concerns in New York, but Breece Hall still looks like the odds-on favorite to not only lead the Jets backfield by a mile in targets, but potentially be the number 2 target on the team. You also have the rushing threat of Justin Fields. Breece Hall could open up more big-time running lanes like we saw with Hall in his first and second year than last season. I'm in on Breece Hall in round 4. Where are you at right now?
Yeah, I'm very in on Breece Hall. I do agree that it's an overcorrection. There's a few things with Breece Hall, right? Number one, I think the number one thing people are saying right now, I guess, they like to read headlines, right? And what was the headline this offseason? And is that, this could be a committee running back approach, right? And I so don't buy that at all.
Wait, for us, you don't think Isaiah Davis is going to take touches away and targets away from Breece Hall?
That's what I'm saying, man. Like, and most people, I mean, if I had to choose one, it would probably be Isaiah Davis over Braylon Allen. But I think most people are saying that Braylon Allen is going to be a big part of that rotation. First of all, I don't think Braylon Allen is good enough to take away touches from Breece Hall. Isaiah Davis, listen, he was one of the most efficient FCS running backs, over his last couple seasons. But at the end of the day, it was a very, very small sample size. He only had like 30 carries or something like that. But at the end of the day, man, that's not what their head coach said. Like all of these publications ran with what he said and made the headline something that it wasn't. All he said was, this was really, really early, right? When he became head coach, right? And he's like, hey, we're going to have a bunch of big bodies in here. I'm sure they'll all love to have a role. And, we'll basically see what happens, when we get to camp. That's all he said. And then they turned into, this is going to be a 3-man rotation. Like I just don't buy that at all. So I think that is playing into the ADP a little bit. Also his down year, quote unquote down year last year. He had a bunch of RB1 finishes, right? But then he ended up having a knee injury. He just talked about it very recently that he was playing with a knee injury all season long last year. So The offense, wasn't that great. You got Tanner Engstrand coming over, right? Hopefully getting some of those shades of Ben Johnson, at least some influence, coming over to the Jets. Not only that, Justin Fields, believe it or not, in two separate offenses, right? Two totally different offenses. He was top 5 in check down rate, despite him being a runner of the football. So, like you said, Breece Hall could easily be the second target in this offense. And even with a rushing quarterback in Justin Fields, he can still rack up those targets because that's all we've seen his entire career and when he was in college. And he was very efficient doing so. So I just think that Breece Hall is somebody who can return top 5 running back value. Like, nobody would be surprised if Breece Hall finished as the top 5 running back this year. But, he's not being taken anywhere close to it.
Yeah, and Breece Hall's never averaged fewer than 15 points per game. So we have a huge sample size of him producing. And what if Tanner Engstrand, like, I always think that the Tanner Engstrand hire was really like an inspired one by Aaron Glenn and a little bit of a risky one, because a lot of times when we get these first time head coaches in the NFL, he'll grab like a retread, like guy who's coached a bunch of seasons as an offensive coordinator and some name that we've heard a million times and maybe we don't get so excited about. Engstrand was under Ben Johnson. And what I think this is it's a creativity and aggressiveness are two things that we saw from Ben Johnson. And I think we'll also see that from Engstrand. I think Aaron Glenn knows what he's doing. He's very respected. And I think that it's gonna look like a very smart decision. We have a few of these guys that are the Dan Campbell, Ben Johnson tree, including Ben Johnson this year. And we're going to see how this works out, but I'm willing to bet on Engstrand. This could be very good for Breece Hall. And there's just not enough skill position players for them to phase Breece Hall out. We're talking about Mason Taylor at tight end, a rookie. We're talking about the Braylon Allen talk. I do buy into Braylon Allen having a weekly role, but to me, it's more like Breece Hall is Aaron Jones plus, and Braylon Allen is like AJ Dillon. That's kind of vibes. It's the
Sure.
big power back getting a weekly touches, but Breece Hall's the one that scores the fantasy points. So I'm in on Hall. I wouldn't be surprised if his ADP moves up slightly. So I would definitely attack those 4th round shares now if you're drafting in the middle of July. Let's talk about the tight end position. So we'll get Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, George Kittle out of the way. Let's say you miss on the big 3 tight ends. Who's your favorite tight end target? And you could take this any way you want. It can be tight end 1, it could be a tight end 2. Guys that you're very enthusiastic about at cost right now for us.
Yeah, I'm at cost overall. Like, I think Kittle might be my favorite just overall, right? In that kind of elite tight end 1 group. But after that, I'm kind of looking at the Andrews, Engram, Tyler Warren, and Njoku kind of tier. They're all being drafted very close to each other. I tend to wait a little bit past Andrews, past Engram, because at times there are a couple running backs and wide receivers I like in that range. So I'm a little crazy with it. So I wait sometimes for Njoku, and if I end up missing on him, I grab Tyler Warren, man. Like, I'm so big on Tyler Warren, and I'm totally fine. See, because at that point of the draft, right, you're taking a little bit of a risk that you end up punting the tight end position. And so, like, at that point of the draft, like, I don't look at it like, oh my God, if I don't draft Njoku, it's going to be over, because that offense is also super, super iffy. Like, you don't know what to expect. Yeah, sure, Joe Flacco can start a few games to start the year, but they're probably going to move on to like Shador or somebody, later in the season or even early in the season. So we don't know what we're going to get there. We assume that Njoku is going to be good all year long. But, I think Tyler Warren, there's a chance that he's the best tight end of this entire group and even has the highest route participation of this entire group, right? So I'm happy with that. Now, if I had to throw some random shots later, like much later, I'm looking at Hunter Henry, who had, his best season, or I guess highest touchdown total season with Josh McDaniels, a few years ago. And then I'm taking shots at the rookies, man, like Terrance Ferguson, Elijah Arroyo. Those are the guys I'm looking at, because Terrance Ferguson, big fan of his, saw him at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah,
I
and
just
I'll
think
give
that
you
he's
props on this one.
underrated.
I'll give Faraz some props on this one, because during the Senior Bowl, you were very enthusiastic about Ferguson, and we were all over Elijah Arroyo, Brett and I, but I believe you had Ferguson as your favorite tight end at the Senior Bowl, and then he had that amazing combine, and you ended up looking very, very sharp on that take. A lot of people were very focused on Harold Fannin that week. People were very focused on Elijah Arroyo. Mason Taylor was there, but you pounded the table for Terrance Ferguson, so definitely some props on that for us.
No, I appreciate that. And he ended up going, so, during the Senior Bowl week, like he was supposed to be, he was being looked at as a day 3 guy, right? And I just wasn't sure why. And then he gets drafted, early on, right? On day 2. And I'm like, oh, okay, good. Like this is awesome. I'm so glad that he was taken early because there was a little bit of validation there. We'll see if he ends up being a good player. But at the end of the day, like, the fact that he's paired with Sean McVay, makes me pretty excited. And you never know. Like Tyler Higbee's there, but like, do they want a little bit of juice there? Like, do they want some youth? Do they want, somebody who could be, maybe a little bit of a legit third option, behind the 2 wide receivers we talked about before?
Yeah, and I think, Tutu Atwell sort of is what he is. Jordan Whittington is what he is. If we saw Puka or Devontae Adams miss time, especially in the second half of the season, we might see Ferguson have those sort of high upside looks in that Rams offense that could really help us out, especially in best ball builds. But yeah, I mean, I think the theme of the show is Tyler Warren. You're in on him. We need to take a big look at him. I just think Warren is a player that you talk about all those targets of yours in that range. Mark Andrews, older, has had injuries. He's not old, but he's nearing 30. He has the threat of Isaiah Likely around him. Evan Ingram is 31 right now, and David Njoku, he's not old. He's like 28 years old, but like you said, that could be an offense that is switching quarterbacks mid-year. Some of the usage might change. I like Njoku a lot. He's been a guy that I've been flag planting, but with Warren, I think his role is going to be fairly static this year. 20% target share, and if it's Daniel Jones, the chance for that Taysom Hill role, very, very interesting upside pick at the tight end position. Switching over to quarterback, a lot of times when we're looking for an upside ADP winner, we're looking for quarterbacks with rushing upside, really elevating their floor and keeping them as sort of safer picks than a player that you're trying to thread the needle with a bunch of touchdown passes. We've got a few quarterbacks going in that low end QB1, high end QB2 range that you like a lot. Start out by talking about Justin Fields. You talked about Garrett Wilson. You talked about Breece Hall. Fields has been an easy click for me, right around QB10. Feels like he's in a great spot to regain some fantasy momentum that we had with him in Chicago from a few years back.
100%, man. I'm huge on Fields. I think Fields is, he's just underrated, man. Like in fantasy, right? Like he was QB7 in his 6 games as a starter last year. He never had a plethora of weapons to work with, right? Like, so again, like he doesn't have that many in New York either, but at least he has a number 1 in Garrett Wilson. At least he has Breece Hall to check it down to, and then he tucks and runs. Like it's kind of what you want, right? And the biggest thing for me is that you have a team who is committed to him, right? There's no ambiguity of whether Fields will get benched at some point this year. There's no competition. Like he's the guy. So it's a much different situation this year than at this time last year. And if I end up losing out on Justin Fields, there's always Drake May.
There you go. I love that one. And with Fields, people forget just how efficient he was as a runner. We saw the rushing touchdowns last year in Pittsburgh. Those were up there in his starts, but he is third all time in rushing yards per game. And number 2 is Jaden Daniels. Number 1 is Lamar Jackson. Justin Fields averaged more rushing yards per game in his career in terms of his starts than Michael Vick, than Cam Newton. I mean, it's crazy how productive he was as a runner. And he's like 19th all time, top 20 all time in NFL history in quarterback rushing yardage. I think when you look at it, Lamar Jackson is drafted where he's drafted for a reason, and it's a warranted pick. Jaden Daniels as well. But you have to put Justin Fields in that mix as a player that could lead all quarterbacks in terms of rushing yards this year. If he hits 1,000 rushing yards, that's the quarterback you should have taken in drafts no matter what anybody else does this season. But continue your Drake Maye enthusiasm, because even though they're pretty close together in terms of like quarterback 10 versus quarterback 14, Maye sometimes falls a little bit later, especially in leagues where people are not elevating a QB2.
Yeah, 100%. And we are talking about like, our strategy, right? Like around this tight end position, around the quarterback position. And so for your listeners, like I do have more of how I approach my, do not draft list or my must draft list and that strategy. So I actually created a complete blueprint for my drafts this year in like a Google Doc. So if I only had one draft this year, how I would approach it, all the strategy, it's completely free. Just if you follow me on Instagram at Upper Hand Fantasy and you DM me the word blueprint, I can send that right over to you for free. So back to your Drake May thing. Like I look at a poor man's Josh Allen, big body, who got, he got all his rushing production last year on scrambles. Like he gave us 37 rushing yards per game last year in his full games. And that's only Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, and Jaden Daniels averaged more per game. And all of them were above an 18% design rushing rate. Do you know what May was at? He was at 3%. Okay, which is absolutely criminal. Let's put Alex Van Pelt in jail. Okay,
Yeah, let's put him in jail for sure, so he doesn't come back to the NFL.
And now he gets a real offensive coordinator in Josh McDaniels. Josh McDaniels gave Cam Newton a 26% design rush rate a few seasons ago. Okay, it's absolutely bananas. And I think that part of May's game is going to be unlocked. So I can totally see him being used around the goal line as well. That would be a cherry on top, not super necessary. But then you look at the weapons he has now. Like he had nobody last year, right? He had DeMario Douglas, Hunter Henry, Jalen Polk, never made that, that leap. So he has some underrated weapons, obviously Diggs, and also I'm a big fan of Kyle Williams as well. So given the fact that he still averaged 18.7 fantasy points per game in his full games last year, that was on pace to be QB9. He had an underrated rookie season. I think he has a chance to surprise a lot of people. And you mentioned these late round, rushing quarterbacks. Like I was banging the table for Jaden Daniels later in drafts last year, who was kind of being taken, around that, low end QB1 range. So for me this year, it's Maye and Justin Fields.
Yeah, I like both of them as targets. I think Maye, the opportunity for him to be a one-man gang type usage, like a Josh Allen type usage this year, is there. And I think that with Mike Vrabel and with Josh McDaniel, you're going to have aggressive and rational coaching there. So I'm in on Drake Maye. And with Drake Maye, you don't have to make him the focus of your draft. You could actually draft two quarterbacks and have Maye be like that upside play, combine him with a Baker Mayfield type, depending on where guys fall in your draft. So very much in on it. Love the quarterback calls, and I like a lot of your calls today, Faraz. Give everybody a bold prediction for the 2025 fantasy football season.
Yeah, listen, this would be off brand if I didn't mention Josh Downs. Okay, Josh Downs finishing as a top 15 wide receiver this season.
I like that one.
Is that is that bold enough?
It's not that. It's not. Listen, it's. I'll let it fly. We're not like standing up and clapping. I think it's. I like your enthusiasm for Josh Downs. You could have said top 12. Like could have said wide receiver 1.
I totally could.
It's like one more point per game for us. Just pound the table, make him wide receiver 12.
All right, Theo. Josh Downs finishes the top 12 wide receiver.
Now we're talking.
There you go.
Josh Downs, wide receiver 1 season. You heard it from Faraz. Stick with us here at Fantasy Football Daily. We're going to be bringing you pods like this multiple times a week, getting you ready to crush your drafts and crush the 2025 fantasy football season. John Hansen is with me next. Make sure you're subscribed and make sure you're checking us out on YouTube. If you're a podcast listener, give us a subscription to YouTube. It costs you nothing. It helps us out a lot. We're growing big time on YouTube. Make sure you check that one out. We'll see you soon.